Hey guys, tonight we are stepping into the water-bound world of the Aztecs where the line between land and lake blurs and an ordinary afternoon could feel like a drifting dream. Imagine yourself standing on the edge of Lake Xochimilco, the sun bouncing off its rippling surface and the air filled with a mixture of wet earth flowers and wood smoke. The boats are waiting, flat-bottomed canoes carved from single tree trunks, their hulls damp and scratched, from years of pushing through shallow canals. You step in wobbling a little because you are not exactly used to balancing on a floating plank that seems one sneeze away from capsizing. Reality check. You probably will not survive very long without some practice, but lucky for you, this is only in your imagination, so you will not actually tumble into the muck. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you are tuning in tonight from somewhere far away, drop your location and the local time down in the comments. It always amazes me where you are all listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your boat glides forward, the wooden paddle sending ripples across the water. You can feel the slight resistance of the current against the blade, though most of these canals are so shallow that they seem to resist more from stubborn reeds than from the water itself. Ahead, the floating gardens appear not exactly floating in the way you might imagine, like lily pads drifting aimlessly, but rather engineered islands, anchored firmly to the lake bed with carefully planted willow trees. Historians still argue whether the word chinampa should really be translated as floating garden at all, since they are more like carefully managed extensions of the earth itself. Still, to your sleepy imagination, they appear to float. Rectangular plots, fringed with reeds with lush rows of maize rising like green soldiers and patches of beans creeping along the edges. You lean over the boat's side and see how the islands are layered bundles of reeds, thick mats of mud, and then fresh soil piled higher until they form a raised bed. The Aztecs perfected this technique centuries ago, turning marshy lake water into some of the most fertile farmland in the world. It is not silent here, though the atmosphere is calming. You hear the distant slap of a paddle, the quack of a duck, the flutter of herons lifting off into the sky. A farmer calls across the canal, his voice echoing strangely over the water, reminding his son not to drop the basket of beans into the drink again. That son, perhaps 12 years old, looks unimpressed and mutters something under his breath. Some things about parent-child farming dynamics are timeless. As your canoe drifts closer to the shore of one chinampa, you notice the tiny shrines tucked into the corners of these gardens. Each one has a clay figure or a smudge of ash from recent offerings. Farmers believed that the fertility of these plots was not just about the soil but about maintaining favor with the gods. The smell of copal resin lingers faintly in the air, a reminder that earlier someone had burned incense here for Tlaloc, the rain deity, or perhaps for Xochiquetzal, goddess of flowers. Quirky detail here. Some records suggest that farmers also left small food offerings in the canals. For the water monsters thought to live below, half legend, half excuse to toss scraps without guilt. You dip your hand into the canal water. It is surprisingly cool, almost startling against the warm afternoon air. The sensation carries you back to the idea that this lake is alive, pulsing beneath the orderly rows of maize and amaranth. Fish dart just beneath the surface, flashing silver. Every movement feels amplified here, as though time itself slows down once you step into these waters. A group of laborers paddles past their canoes heavy with mud, scooped from the lake bed. They are singing in low voices, not particularly melodious, but rhythmic enough to keep time with their paddling. This mud will be heaped onto the chinampas to refresh the soil, a constant task, because the Aztecs did not leave these gardens to chance. The empire's capital, Tenochtitlan, relied on this food supply to feed hundreds of thousands of people. Without this system, the city might have starved. Historians still debate just how many tons of maize could be harvested in a season, but the consensus is clear. These gardens produced an astonishing abundance. Your boat drifts close enough for you to catch a few words of their song. It is a simple refrain about water and earth, the kind of work song that probably never made it into any official codex, but lived on the lips of generations. It reminds you of modern sea shanties, though with fewer mentions of rum and more about maize. You smile quietly to yourself, imagining a Spotify playlist called Aztec Work Vibes Lo-Fi Beats to Paddle to. The afternoon sun tilts, throwing long reflections across the water. You squint because the glare is bright, but then lower your gaze to the gentle motion of reeds brushing past the canoe. The world seems wrapped in shades of green and brown, punctuated only by the bright bursts of flowers, marigolds, especially glowing orange and gold. Some are destined not for decoration but for ritual. Later in the day you might spot a canoe filled entirely with blossoms headed to the temples. The farther you go, the more the city noise fades. You hear the occasional call of a vendor's horn from somewhere beyond the lake, but mostly it is the sound of nature. Insects, hummingbirds, trilling water lapping. It is not perfectly quiet, but it is the kind of soundscape that makes your eyelids heavy, like background music meant for sleep. You lean back, resting on the smooth side of the canoe, and let yourself sink into the rhythm of it all. The canals twist and turn, but each bend reveals another small miracle of human ingenuity. A patch of squash vines here, a willow tree there, its roots anchoring the soil and its branches swaying in the breeze. Somewhere a dog barks, startling a group of ducks into flight. They rise noisily, wings slapping the air, then settle again a few feet away as if the disruption never happened. For a fleeting moment you consider how fragile all this must have been. The empire is vast, its politics complicated, its armies often at war. Yet here in this watery grid of gardens, life carries on with remarkable steadiness. Farmers tend children, play vendors, paddle by. It is a system both delicate and resilient, like a hammock strung between trees, swaying easily but still holding strong. You sigh, feeling the weight of modern life drift off as you slip deeper into this slow afternoon. The canoe creaks softly beneath you, and you let your mind wander, following the current wherever it wants to take you. Your canoe nudges against a shallow bend in the canal, and now you watch the real heart of this whole watery puzzle unfold. The chinampas do not just appear out of nowhere, they are built layer by careful layer, as though someone is baking a cake of soil and reeds that never quite finishes. You lean forward, trying not to tip over, as a group of workers demonstrates the process. First, they stake out the rectangle, driving long wooden poles deep into the mud of the lake bed. Then they weave reeds between the poles, forming a kind of floating fence. Inside that frame, they heap mud dredged from the bottom of the lake, piling it higher and higher until an island emerges. It is messy work. The mud smells faintly like sulfur and algae, clinging to the laborers' arms. They laugh at one another occasionally, tossing handfuls of reeds into the air just to watch them fall in a sloppy mess. You find yourself imagining a modern construction site, but with more duck quacks and fewer hard hats. Historians still argue whether the earliest chinampas were first designed here on Xochimilco, or whether the practice spread from smaller villages around the Valley of Mexico. The truth may be buried deep beneath the layers of silt, unlikely to be dredged up anytime soon. The workers tell each other stories as they labor, voices rising and falling in rhythm with the scoop of mud. You catch snippets. One man jokes about how his wife thinks he spends more time with the lake than with her. Another warns his nephew not to let a snake slither into the canoe again. Quirky detail, some sources suggest that farmers occasionally planted chili peppers along the edges of chinampas, not just for food but because the strong smell was thought to keep water snakes away. It may or may not have worked, but you imagine the snakes politely turning their noses up and slithering elsewhere. As the structure grows, willow trees are planted along the borders. Their roots burrow down and twist, grabbing the soil in a grip so strong that centuries later, some chinampas still exist in nearly the same form. You look at the willows, their branches swaying leaves rustling softly in the breeze, and you realize they are guardians as much as anchors. They keep the land from drifting away, protect against erosion, and offer shade to the farmers. If you lean back and squint, the sight of their drooping branches brushing the water could almost lull you to sleep right here. You notice the steady teamwork among the builders. There is no shouting, no frantic rush. It is all done with deliberate calm, each action building on the last. It strikes you that in a city of hundreds of thousands, such patient labor made everything possible. The island grows inch by inch, but in time it becomes a rectangle bursting with maize, beans, and squash, the very staples that kept the empire's bellies full. One man stops for a drink of water carried in a clay jar. He tips it back, wiping his mouth with his sleeve, and grins at you. You nod back as though you belong here, though in truth, if someone handed you a paddle and asked you to dredge mud, you would probably drop it immediately and drift downstream. Joke number 1. At least you would make good entertainment for the ducks. The sun is climbing now, making the air heavy with warmth. Flies buzz lazily around the mud piles. A woman arrives with a basket of tamales wrapped in corn husks, setting them down on the edge of the chinampa. The workers gather quickly, mud still streaking their arms, grateful for the pause. You can almost taste the masa, steaming hot, spiced with chili. She offers you one, and though you are only a visitor in imagination, you feel the comfort of holding that warm bundle in your hands. Around you, the chinampas stretch like a chessboard across the lake, each rectangle a testament to ingenuity. Some are newly built, others long established, with tall maize stalks rising proudly. The water glimmers between them like silver veins, connecting all the plots into one vast living organism. You drift in your canoe, imagining the countless hands that have repeated this same process for generations. Staking poles, weaving reeds, piling mud, planting willows. It is a rhythm older than memory, older than the empire itself. Historians still puzzle over whether chinampas were primarily a response to population pressure or a stroke of ecological genius that simply happened to flourish. Was it necessity or creativity? Perhaps both. Whatever the case, the result is undeniable. A system capable of producing up to 7 harvests a year, a figure that boggles the modern mind. You picture a spreadsheet with crop yields so outrageous that even the most skeptical bureaucrat would rub his eyes in disbelief. The workers finish their meal, wipe their hands on their tunics, and return to their task. The mud piles grow higher. The reeds sag under the weight, but soon the structure holds firm. Slowly, the island will dry out and firm up until it can support crops, shrines, even small houses. You let your gaze wander to the horizon, where smoke curls faintly from cooking fires. Somewhere out there, children are already running across chinampas, built decades earlier, their footsteps echoing the labor unfolding before you now. The canal water laps gently against your canoe, as though marking time with the builders. You exhale, realizing how hypnotic this cycle is. Scoop layer, plant, harvest, repeat. It is work, yes, but it is also meditation, a practice in patience and persistence. Joke number 2. If the modern self-help industry knew about chinampas, there would be an app called Build an Island in Your Mind, Daily Mindfulness, for $4.99 a month. You watch until the workers fade into the rhythm of their task, almost indistinguishable from the mud and reeds they shape. The afternoon stretches ahead, promising more glimpses into the life of these watery gardens. For now, though, you simply let the gentle rocking of the canoe carry you onward, the sound of paddles and laughter blending with the calls of birds above. You drift between islands, feeling the sun warm your shoulders, and know you are sinking deeper into this tranquil world. The canal bends again, opening into a busier stretch where the rhythm of daily life hums along like a soft drumbeat. Now, instead of workers dredging mud, you see narrow canoes packed with goods, their bows stacked high with baskets of maize, chilies, and amaranth. A woman kneels in one boat, balancing with impossible grace, as she rearranges a pile of squashes so they will not tumble into the water. Another vendor steadies his craft by sticking his paddle into the mud at the canal's edge, while calling out the price of beans in a voice so loud it could rival any modern street hawker. You lean back and let the sights wash over you. The morning market on the water feels alive, almost theatrical. Canoes glide past each other like actors entering and leaving stage, each carrying its own small scene. Here comes a fisherman still smelling of lake water, trying to sell a wriggling axolotl to a woman with sharp eyes and sharper bargaining skills. There goes a young boy with a crate of tomatoes, so red and glossy, you wonder if he polished each one by hand. Joke number 1. If Aztec Yelp had existed, you can bet this kid would have had a 5-star produce rating. The market sounds are soothing in their own way, even though voices overlap and deals are struck quickly. There is no rushing engine noise, no clamour of carts rattling over cobblestones, only the gentle splash of paddles, the soft thump of baskets being set down, the occasional laughter spilling over the water. You breathe deeply and catch the faint scent of herbs, epizode and mint, mixed with the earthy sweetness of maize. It is oddly comforting, like standing in your grandmother's kitchen while she cooks, except here the kitchen floats. Historians still argue whether these smaller boat markets fed primarily local neighbourhoods, or if most of the produce went straight to the enormous central market at Tlatelolco. The truth is probably a mix, but imagining the bustling trade here on the canals helps you appreciate how layered the Aztec economy was. These boats are like delivery trucks, except without exhaust fumes, honking horns, or parking tickets. One canoe glides up alongside you, its vendor smiling broadly, her hair braided with bright ribbons. She gestures toward her goods. A mound of beans, neat stacks of chilies and bundles of herbs tied with reeds. You decline politely, knowing you cannot actually take any home, but she laughs and waves anyway, as if sensing your ghostly tourist status. You picture yourself fumbling for modern currency here, pulling out a credit card and having the vendor blink in confusion. Joke number 2. Nusir, we do not take visa, but we do accept cacao beans. The exchange of cacao beans still fascinates you. These little brown seeds were not just for drinking, but served as a form of money. Imagine a wallet that jingles not with coins, but rattles softly with beans. It seems precarious, but it worked. A canoe passes by carrying sacks of the precious commodity guarded carefully, because spilling your wallet here would mean literally feeding the fish. The market bustle has a rhythm, and you find yourself swaying slightly in the canoe as though rocking to invisible music. A fisherman calls out the morning's best catch. A young girl rows past with a basket of flowers, her arms straining but her expression proud. Somewhere further down the canal, someone starts humming a tune, low and steady, rising above the chatter. It all weaves together into a soundscape that could lull you into a doze if you are not careful. You drift past one canoe loaded with pottery clay, jars, bowls and cups balanced precariously. The artisan who made them sits, cross-legged, his hands resting on his knees as if daring the canal to upset his wares. He waves at you, his smile patient. Quirky fact: some Chinampa farmers used broken pottery shards to help with drainage, mixing fragments into the soil. Recycling before recycling was even a word. You wonder how many cracked bowls beneath your feet are now part of the earth itself. The bargaining never grows hostile. It is quick, efficient, and tinged with humour. A woman insists her chilies are twice as hot as her neighbour's, while her neighbour pretends to faint dramatically at the suggestion. Laughter ripples across the canal. You realise you are witnessing not just commerce but community, a way of reinforcing bonds between people who share this watery world. Historians still puzzle over whether the Aztec rulers ever tightly regulated these boat markets, or if they were left to float along with only loose oversight. Some argue that local officials must have collected tribute or taxes here, while others suggest these smaller exchanges slipped quietly beneath the empire's notice. Either way, the markets thrived, and in their survival they tell stories of resilience and everyday ingenuity. As the sun rises higher, you notice the shimmer of heat on the water's surface. The vendors dab their faces with cloths, children splash their hands in the canal to cool off, and birds wheel overhead, looking for scraps. You dip your own fingers again into the water. It is cool and refreshing, like a pause button for the senses. The moment stretches long, unhurried. A boy paddles past holding a flute. He plays a quick tune more for himself than for anyone else, and the notes ripple out across the market. For a moment, everyone seems to pause, just a breath in the flow of trade before returning to their work. The sound lingers in your ears, a reminder that even in the middle of bargaining and carrying baskets, beauty slips in quietly. You let your canoe drift to the edge of the bustle, the sound fading just enough to let your thoughts settle. You feel the pull of drowsiness now, not from boredom, but from the steady, repetitive rhythms of this life. Joke number 3. If this were a guided meditation app, the voice would tell you to inhale maize, exhale beans. The canal widens again, leading you toward the next rhythm of the day. Behind you, the market carries on, voices, paddles, laughter, all blending into one soothing hum. Ahead, the fields of chinampas stretch open once more, waiting for the farmers to tend their crops in the heavy warmth of midday. The market noise fades behind you as the canal narrows again, and you find yourself moving past neat rows of maize, beans, and squash. This is where the true labor of the chinampas unfolds, and you can almost feel the pulse of growth beneath the soil. Farmers bend low, their feet sinking slightly into the damp ground, hands busy pulling weeds that have the audacity to sprout where they are not wanted. You crouch down with them in imagination, dirt sticking to your palms, and realize quickly that farming here is not glamorous. It is repetitive, muddy, and backbreaking. Joke number 1. The Aztec version of leg day is basically every day on a chinampa. The rows of maize stretch high leaves, rustling in the breeze. You brush your hand along them, the texture rough but alive. These stalks are the empire's lifeblood, the very thing that allowed cities like Tenochtitlan to grow so massive. Historians still argue whether maize domestication was fully perfected here in the Valley of Mexico or brought in from earlier agricultural centers, but there is no debate about its centrality. It is everywhere. Tortillas, tamales drinks, even ceremonial offerings. You think about modern corn on the cob at a summer barbecue and laugh softly. Here there are no buttered ears, but there is reverence. Beside the maize grow beans, their vines, winding up wooden poles for support, cleverly using the maize stalks themselves as ladders. Squash sprawls at ground-level broad leaves, shading the soil, keeping it moist. It is the Three Sisters system, a farming technique, as elegant as it is practical, plants working together, each covering the other's weaknesses. You hear a farmer muttering about how the beans are climbing too far and need to be coaxed back down. You imagine plants with minds of their own, sneaking away at night when no one is watching. Joke number 2. If beans had TikTok, you would just see endless videos of them climbing things they are not supposed to. The irrigation channels glisten with water. Farmers scoop it up with gourds, sprinkling it over the roots. Some carry clay pots with small holes at the bottom, letting water seep out slowly, an ancient drip irrigation system. The sound of trickling water is hypnotic. You lean closer and catch sight of small fish darting in the canals, flashing like coins in the sun. Some are left there intentionally, fish droppings, enriching the water, feeding the crops in a cycle too perfect to be accidental. Historians still debate how much of this was trial and error versus deliberate ecological design, but either way, the effect is astonishing. A woman pauses to rest, wiping sweat from her brow with the back of her sleeve. She squats under a willow tree, breaking off a bit of tortilla from a bundle tucked at her side. sharing it with a child who has been helping her pull weeds. The child's laughter rings out as he points to a frog leaping between the rows. You follow his gaze and see the frog disappear into the squash leaves, its plop into the canal echoing faintly. The scene is so ordinary yet so alive that it lodges in your mind like a lullaby. Quirky tidbit. Farmers sometimes offered tiny clay figurines shaped like maize cobs during planting, as if to remind the gods, please let these grow. Imagine modern gardeners leaving little ceramic tomatoes in their planters just in case. It makes you smile at the continuity of human hope. The sun is hotter now, and you feel it pressing against your shoulders. The workers do not stop though, they pace themselves steady, careful. The rhythm of hoe against soil, hand against weeds and water against roots creates a background music you had not noticed before. You find your breath sinking with it slow, and even like drifting into meditation. A farmer waves you closer, showing off the thickness of a maize stalk. He pats it proudly as if it were a child who had just learned to walk. His pride is infectious, and you nod approvingly. Joke number 3. You half expect him to pull out a baby photo album of corn sprouts. Instead, he gestures to the beans, explaining how the vines fix nitrogen in the soil, though he says it in words you cannot quite translate. Still, the knowledge is there, ancient, passed down through generations. The child returns with a clay jar of water, and everyone takes turns sipping from it. The water is cool, drawn fresh from the canal, and though your modern stomach might protest, they drink it without concern. Their bodies are adapted, their lives intertwined with this water, in a way you can only imagine. The air is heavy with the smell of earth sun-warmed and alive. You inhale deeply, letting the scent settle into your chest. Somewhere, a bird sings its call, rising above the rustle of maize. For a moment, the entire Chinampa seems to breathe with you as though the soil itself exhales after each harvest. You sit quietly on the edge of the canoe, letting your feet dangle close to the water. The farm scene around you continues without pause, work, steady laughter, soft, the cycle endless. You realize this is what sustains an empire. Not battles or ceremonies alone, but the quiet repetition of hands in the soil season after season. The sun tips toward afternoon now, the shadows stretching longer. The workers finish watering, a row tying up bean vines that have gone astray. You feel the day sliding forward, carrying you deeper into the rhythm of this watery world. The canal calls you onward again, and as the paddle dips into the cool water, you leave behind the maize fields, though their rustling whispers seem to follow you for a while. The canal widens into a stretch, almost glowing with colour. You blink, because after the greens and browns of maize and beans, the sudden blaze of orange and yellow feels like stepping into another world. Canoes pass you slowly, each stacked high with flowers, marigolds, dahlias and lilies. Their petals spill over the baskets, brushing the water so that the canal itself looks sprinkled with confetti. The air fills with fragrance, earthy, yet sweet, as if the lake has been turned into one long garland. You draw closer, and a woman steadies her boat with practiced balance. She kneels among heaps of marigolds, carefully arranging them into bundles tied with reeds. Her hands move quickly yet with care, because these flowers are not mere decoration. They will end up in temple rituals laid before gods as offerings or adorning the bodies of the honored dead. Quirky tidbit. Aztec priests sometimes ground marigold petals into ointments they believed could soothe aches, which sounds charming until you imagine explaining to your modern pharmacist that you need a prescription for flower paste. The canoes move in slow procession, their cargo more delicate than maize or beans. A young boy balances at the bow of one arms, stretched wide like a tightrope walker, pretending he is keeping the flowers safe by sheer willpower. His mother scolds him gently, though she cannot hide her smile. Joke number 1. If she could text in this world, it would probably read, "My kid thinks he's a flower bodyguard, send help." Historians still argue whether the scale of flower cultivation in the Chinampas was driven more by ritual demand or by sheer aesthetic love of color. Some accounts suggest whole fields were devoted to blooms simply for festivals, while others argue that everyday trade kept florists busy long before temple needs arose. Whatever the truth, your eyes confirm that flowers are everywhere. Overflowing boats, scattered petals on the water, and garlands already strung across willow branches near the canal's edge. You lean over the canoe, dipping your hand into the water where stray petals float like miniature boats. They brush your skin as they drift, carried by the current, each one a tiny reminder of how beauty seeps into even the smallest corners of life. Above, dragonflies skim the surface, their wings flashing blue and green. For a second, they look like living jewels, as if someone dropped a box of turquoise and emerald into the air. A vendor calls out, offering not vegetables or fish, but bunches of lilies. You imagine walking into a supermarket today and finding someone pushing a cart filled only with flowers, their face serious, as though it is the most practical shopping trip ever. Joke number 2. Forget bread and milk. We need 20 bundles of marigolds stat. The canoes pass each other without hurry, exchanging greetings, sometimes pausing to trade a basket of beans for a bouquet of dahlias. Commerce here is not always about survival. It is about beauty status and the rituals that stitch society together. You think about how modern cities often relegate flowers to the sidelines, special occasions only. Here they flow through daily life like water itself. One farmer points proudly to his chinampa, where neat rows of flowers bloom in every color imaginable. He explains, though you only catch fragments, that the soil dredged from canals is particularly good for petals. The flowers drink greedily, their stems rising tall and strong. You picture the farmer fussing over them like pets, making sure each blossom is admired before being cut. You notice a group of young girls braiding garlands from fresh marigolds, their laughter bubbling as they race to see who can finish the longest chain. They crown one another, petals scattering into their hair, and for a moment you are struck by how timeless the scene feels. Children playing with flowers is not uniquely Aztec. It could happen anywhere, anytime. But here it feels woven into the very fabric of the landscape. Historians still debate whether particular flowers had specific symbolic meanings in everyday life. Marigolds certainly became associated with honoring the dead, a tradition that echoes even into modern Mexican festivals. But what about dahlias or lilies? Were they symbols of love, power, or simply admired for their beauty? The answers slip through the centuries, leaving us with glimpses but no certainty. The sun sits high overhead and the brightness makes the petals shimmer as though glowing from within. You squint, shading your eyes, but cannot look away. The scene feels almost unreal, canals turned into moving rivers of color. You half expect someone to burst into a musical number, though the closest you get is a vendor humming softly as he adjusts a basket of lilies. Joke number 3. If Aztec Broadway existed, this would definitely be the opening act, Marigold. The musical. As your canoe glides through this flower market on water, you let yourself sink deeper into the sensory feast. The fragrance, the color, the laughter, the rhythm of paddles, it is overwhelming yet calming, like being wrapped in a quilt made of petals. You lean back, eyes half closed, and feel the day slide forward, carrying you gently toward the rituals and meals that await beyond these glowing blossoms. The fragrance of marigolds lingers on the breeze as you drift farther, and then the rhythm of the canal shifts. The chatter of vendors fades into a softer murmur, replaced by a smoky scent that curls through the air. Ahead, on the edge of a chinampa, you spot a small gathering. Priests in white cotton garments stand near a low altar, their hair tied back, faces calm but intent. A thin column of smoke rises from a clay bowl, spiraling upward until it disappears into the sky. You realize you are witnessing one of the midday rituals, a pause in the labor of the fields to honor the powers that make it all possible. The smoke is copal incense, its resinous smell sharp yet strangely sweet, mingling with the wet scent of the lake. You let it fill your lungs the way you might savor a campfire, though here it carries sacred weight. One priest scatters flower petals onto the water, watching them drift slowly. Another dips his fingers into a bowl of water and flicks droplets into the air. You feel a few specks land on your arm and imagine for a moment that you are being included, however unofficially, in the blessing. Historians still argue whether such daily rituals were strictly scheduled across the Chinampas or performed more casually by local farmers as the mood struck. Some suggest priests had to travel along canals to ensure proper ceremonies, while others believe families carried out small offerings on their own. The truth likely lies somewhere in between, but standing here you realize how natural it feels, like taking a breath between tasks. One priest chants softly, his voice low and steady, a sound that resonates through your bones more than your ears. The language is Nahuatl, rolling with rhythms. You cannot translate, but you understand the intention. Gratitude for water, soil, and sun. Without them, no maize, no beans, no empire. Quirky tidbit. Some ritual manuals describe priests offering paper cutouts shaped like tiny gods, which they floated on the water as a kind of symbolic gift. Imagine today's equivalent, leaving a folded paper boat at the edge of your garden as a thank you. You kneel in your canoe, trying to keep balance while craning your neck for a better look. The smoke from the incense curls around you, and you feel your eyelids growing heavy, lulled by the steady chant. Joke number 1. If you had a Fitbit tracking your stress, it would definitely report user has entered full chill mode. Farmers nearby pause their work to watch, leaning on their hoes or sitting cross-legged on the ground. A few murmur their own prayers, lips moving silently. One man places a basket of beans on the edge of the water, sprinkling a handful into the canal. The beans scatter like little pebbles, sending ripples across the surface. You smile at the thought that fish are now unknowing participants in this ritual feast. The sun is at its peak, hot and pressing, and the priests wipe their foreheads as they continue. Yet they do not seem rushed. Each gesture is deliberate, as if time itself bends to the rhythm of the ritual. You notice a boy standing nearby holding a clay flute. At a cue, he plays a few notes, high and thin, almost like birdsong. The sound weaves into the chant, not overpowering but accenting it like embroidery on cloth. Historians still debate whether these ceremonies were primarily about agriculture or whether they carried political undertones, reminders of the empire's divine right to rule. Perhaps both. In this moment, though, all you see is a community bound together by shared reverence for the lake and soil that sustain them. The ritual ends without fanfare. The chanting fades, the smoke thins, and the priests step back. One scoops a little water in his palm and lets it run between his fingers, watching it fall like tiny streams. Another smiles, faintly, before picking up his paddle. Just like that, they are part of the everyday world again, moving back into their boats. The farmers return to their tasks, but the stillness lingers like the quiet after a lullaby. Joke number 2. You imagine telling your modern boss you need to pause work every day for an incense ritual. Sorry, can't make the Zoom call. I have to honor the rain god. Honestly, it might be an improvement. As your canoe drifts on, you carry the memory of that smoke, those murmured chants, the faint echo of flute. The ritual leaves you with a sense of balance, labor, and reverence, intertwined soil and spirit feeding each other. You feel lighter, as though you too have been blessed, even if your only offering was quietly watching. The canal narrows again, bordered by tall reeds, whispering in the afternoon breeze. The smell of copal clings faintly to your clothes, a reminder that you have crossed from the practical into the sacred and back again. The water sparkles ahead, promising another layer of this world waiting to be revealed. Joke number 3. You shake your head softly, realizing that in this landscape even weeds probably feel more spiritual than you do on your best yoga day. The sun is beginning to tilt toward afternoon shadows lengthening. Somewhere up ahead, you hear the faint splash of nets hitting the water. Fishermen are at work, and your canoe carries you forward to watch. You follow the sound of water slapping against nets until the canal opens wider, where fishermen are scattered like quiet sentinels. Their canoes drift slowly, each one balanced by a man crouched low eyes, scanning the surface with the patience of a heron. The sun shimmers on the ripples, blinding you for a moment, but then you notice the movement below, shadows, darting silver flashes, breaking the surface before vanishing again. One fisherman leans forward, his paddle tucked under his arm, both hands gripping a net. He casts it in a smooth, practiced arc. The mesh spreads wide before settling into the water, with a hiss, bubbles rising as if the lake itself exhaled. He waits, listening, feeling through the cord like it is an extension of his own skin. Then with a quick jerk, he pulls. The net gathers glistening with droplets, wriggling with axolotls and small fish. You catch the glint of carp scales, the flick of a tail before the catch is tipped into the bottom of the canoe. The fishermen speak little, their focus unbroken. When they do call out, it is with gestures or single words. One whistles sharply, pointing toward the reeds, and you realize he has spotted movement, perhaps more fish, perhaps an axolotl trying to sneak away. Quirky tidbit. Axolotls, often called water monsters in Nahuatl, were more than just food. Some were thought to have medicinal properties brewed into strange remedies. Historians still argue whether these little amphibians were consumed more for their protein or for their supposed healing powers. Either way, they wriggle indignantly in the baskets, unaware of the debate they fuel centuries later. You lean closer, the canoe rocking gently, to watch a boy perched at the front of his father's boat. His job is to scare fish into the nets by slapping the water with a reed pole. He does it enthusiastically, grinning every time a ripple carries outward. Joke number 1. If child labor laws existed here, his would read, "Professional splash maker, age 10. Another canoe drifts nearer. The fisherman balances a long spear, its point carved from obsidian, gleaming dark against the sun. With a sharp thrust, he strikes into the water, pulling up a carp skewered cleanly. He lays it into a basket with the care of someone placing a book on a shelf, then nods at you as though to say, "Yes, it really is that easy. If you know what you are doing." You chuckle softly, certain that if you tried, you would end up stabbing nothing but reeds. Joke number 2. Your spearfishing attempt would be such a disaster. Even the fish would laugh. The air is alive with sound splashing, wings flapping as ducks rise. Startled, the low murmur of men exchanging advice. Somewhere further down the canal, a woman beats laundry against a flat stone, adding her own rhythm to the watery chorus. The smell of lake mud mixes with the faint tang of fish scales, not unpleasant but earthy, grounding. One fisherman empties his catch into a woven basket, shaking his head at the axolotls wriggling among the fish. He mutters something about them being tricksters, always slipping through the nets. The boy beside him laughs, insisting they are just shy. The debate is gentle, the kind of conversation you could imagine repeating for centuries. Historians still debate whether these fishing trips were primarily individual subsistence efforts or part of larger tribute systems feeding the empire. Some evidence suggests entire families depended on these catches to pay their dues, while others hint at more casual local consumption. Whatever the case, the abundance is clear. The canal feels alive, generous, though never without effort. You notice how the fishermen use every part of the lake. Nets for fish, baskets for shrimp, even small traps for aquatic insects that, yes, were eaten roasted. The thought makes you wrinkle your nose slightly, but then again you remember modern snacks like fried crickets, making trendy comebacks. Joke number 3. Imagine showing up at a hip cafe in Mexico City today and ordering heritage insect tapas. The fisherman's movements are almost hypnotic. Cast, wait, pull, repeat. It reminds you of breathing exercises, the kind where inhale and exhale are balanced perfectly. Your mind slows to their pace. The sunlight flashes off each droplet as the nets rise, turning work into art. A boy in one canoe pulls out a flute, blowing a few playful notes while waiting for his father to haul the net. The sound carries across the water, weaving into the rhythm of paddles and splashes. For a moment you feel suspended in time, caught between labor and music, practicality and beauty. As your canoe drifts on, you glance back and see the fishermen still at work, their silhouettes bending and rising like a slow dance against the horizon. The water closes behind you, but the ripples linger, carrying their patience onward into the afternoon. Ahead, you catch the scent of smoke and roasted maize. It seems mealtime is near, and your stomach stirs with curiosity. The smell of roasting maize guides you like a string pulled forward until the canal narrows and you spot a family gathered on the edge of their chinampa. A reed mat is laid out like a picnic blanket, though here it is not leisure but necessity, an everyday pause to share food. You are invited in that unspoken way imagination allows, and you step ashore, settling cross-legged among them. The mat dips slightly beneath your weight, reeds creaking, but it holds steady. The meal is simple yet abundant. A clay pot simmers over a small fire, steam carrying the scent of beans mingled with epazote, an herb sharp and earthy. Nearby, tortillas puff on a comal, their edges curling slightly as they char. A woman flips them with her bare fingers, unfazed by the heat, her hands so practiced they move without hesitation. She offers you one folded neatly, the warmth seeping into your palm like a small sun. You take a bite, and even in imagination the taste is grounding. Soft mussa beans, rich and smoky, a hint of chili lingering at the back of your throat. Joke number 1. You think about your last fast food burrito and realize it would not survive 5 seconds against this tortilla. Children dart around the edges of the meal, giggling as they chase one another between the maize rows. One boy pauses only long enough to grab a tamale from the basket, then runs off again, crumbs trailing in his wake. His grandmother shakes her head, muttering that he eats like a coyote in a hurry. Everyone laughs softly, and you feel the warmth of the moment, food and family binding them together as tightly as reeds in a mat. Historians still argue whether these afternoon meals were formally structured with ritual or simply practical pauses dictated by hunger and sun. Some chronicles describe families offering a small bite of their food to the water first, as a gesture to the gods, while others suggest the practice was informal. Here you see a little girl drop a fragment of tortilla into the canal, watching it drift away with wide-eyed seriousness. Perhaps she knows what she is doing, or perhaps she just likes feeding the fish. Either way, the water ripples as though accepting the gift. The family insists you try more. A bowl of amaranth seeds appears, puffed and mixed with honey into chewy little cakes. They hand one to you with pride, explaining it is both food and offering, eaten by warriors and children alike. Quirky tidbit. Spanish conquerors were so wary of amaranth's ritual use that they tried to suppress it later. But here now, it is simply sweet and satisfying, sticking to your teeth in a way that makes you smile. The father pours out pulque, a milky drink made from fermented agave. He passes it around in gourd cups, the liquid frothy and faintly sour. You sip politely, the flavor unusual but refreshing under the heavy sun. Joke number 2. You silently thank the gods that no one handed you a modern energy drink. Instead, Aztec Pulque Max, now with extra electrolytes. The conversation is light. They talk about the harvest, about who owes what to which neighbor, about whether the maize stalks this year seem taller than last. The rhythm of their words flows around you, a soft lull, as if even speech bends to the pace of the afternoon. You find yourself chewing slowly, savoring every texture, every sound, until even the crackle of the fire feels like part of the meal. Historians still debate whether meals like this were eaten primarily on the Chinampas themselves or taken back into homes in Tenochtitlan. The evidence points both ways, but watching this scene unfold, you understand why people might linger here. The Chinampa is not just a field, it is a living home, complete with shade, water, food, and the laughter of children echoing between the rows. The meal winds down as tortillas are stacked neatly, pots scraped clean. The fire burns low smoke curling into the air. The family rests in the shade bellies, full voices quieting into murmurs. One boy stretches out on the mat head on his mother's lap and drifts towards sleep. You smile softly, realizing that in some ways the entire Chinampa feels like a lullaby, nourishment and rest intertwined. You lean back, feeling the warmth of food settle in your own belly, even if it is only imagined. The earthy beans, the sweet amaranth, the faint tang of pulque, they all linger like memories. Joke number 3. You picture yourself writing a Yelp review for this family meal. 5 stars would get bean stains on my tunic again. The shadows have shifted by now, stretching long across the water. Birds call overhead, dragonflies hover lazily, and the hum of insects begins to rise. The family packs away what remains, tying baskets shut, dousing the fire. The canoe is readied again, but for you the afternoon flows forward, carrying you toward laughter and splashing that ring from further down the canal. Children are at play, and you drift along to watch. The sound reaches you before the sight. A chorus of giggles, shrieks, and splashes echoing across the canal. As you round a curve, you spot them, children darting from canoe to shore and back again, their small bodies slick with water, their hair plastered to their foreheads. They leap fearlessly from low wooden boats, sending ripples dancing outward, as though the entire Chinampa were applauding their games. One boy clambers onto the prow of a canoe, wobbling as it tilts under his weight. His friends cheer him on, and with arms spread like a bird, he jumps plunging into the water with a splash, so big it startles a heron from the reeds. The bird takes off wings, flapping noisily, and the children roar with laughter. Joke number 1. If there were Olympic judges here, the kid would have scored a perfect 10 except for soaking the referee. You notice how carefree they are, no hesitation, no fear of the canal. For them, the water is a playground as familiar as a backyard swing. They swim with awkward but determined strokes, chasing each other, daring one another to dive for pebbles. Some cling to reed stalks as makeshift floaties, giggling whenever they tip upside down. A small girl shows off by catching a dragonfly mid-flight, holding it gently before letting it go again. Historians still argue whether Aztec children were expected to work constantly or allowed moments like this for play. Codices often depict them grinding maize or carrying water, yet oral traditions and observations hint that laughter and games were woven into daily life. Watching these children now, you sense the truth lies between. They labor, yes, but they also carve out joy whenever the chance arises. One boy grabs a long reed pole and challenges his friends to balance atop it, laying it across the water like a log. 2 of them climb on, wobbling and flailing before collapsing into the canal with twin splashes. Their laughter bubbles louder than the water. You smile, realizing that slapstick humor is timeless. Falling into water is funny in every century. Joke number 2. If TikTok had existed, this moment would already have gone viral with the caption, "Aztec kids try log challenge, fail spectacularly." You notice how the adults nearby barely glance at the commotion. A woman weeding her garden shakes her head with a tolerant smile. A fisherman paddles past, pretending not to hear but clearly amused. The children's play is expected, even welcomed, part of the rhythm of the day. The Chinampa is their schoolyard, their swimming pool, their adventure park rolled into one. Quirky tidbit. Some Aztec children played a game with small clay figurines shaped like ducks or fish, setting them afloat on the canals and racing them. You imagine a cluster of toys bobbing along, children shouting encouragement and perhaps even betting a cacao bean or two on which would win. Watching these real ducks flap away from splashes, you wonder if the toys were stand-ins for this same chaotic joy. One girl clambers into the canoe you are sitting in, her wet hair dripping onto the wooden planks. She grins at you, as if daring you to join, then leaps out again without waiting for your answer. Your canoe rocks dangerously, and you clutch the sides, heart racing. Joke number 3. You realize that if you did join, you would be remembered forever as that stranger who sank the canoe. The children's games blur into the scenery, the splashes blending with bird calls, their shouts weaving into the rustle of reeds. The sun tilts lower now, golden light catching the water droplets that sparkle mid-air each time a child leaps. You lean back, letting the sound lull you. It is not loud, not harsh, but rhythmic, a reminder that joy itself can be as soothing as silence. Historians still puzzle over whether childhood in Aztec society was harshly disciplined, as some sources claim, or whether these glimpses of freedom suggest a softer side. Perhaps like all societies, it depended on the family, the day, and the season. Watching the children tumble into the water, you are certain of only one thing. Laughter here has survived the centuries, echoing across time like ripples across the canal. The games continue, but you drift onward, leaving behind their laughter. The sound fades slowly like a song played into silence. Ahead, the air changes again, fresher, sharper, filled with the calls of birds and the buzzing of insects. You realize you are entering a wilder stretch, where the wildlife of the canals thrives as much as the people. The laughter of the children lingers in your ears, even as the canal bends into a quieter, wilder stretch. Here the chinampas seem less cultivated, fringed with tall reeds that sway lazily in the afternoon breeze. The water darkens in patches shadowed by willows that lean over like sleepy guardians. The air hums with life, buzzing, chirping, splashing nature, reclaiming its space even in a landscape shaped by human hands. You tilt your head upward and see a white egret standing motionless at the canal's edge, its long neck curved elegantly like a drawn bow. It waits patient until with a lightning-fast strike its beak pierces the water and emerges with a wriggling fish. The egret tosses it back, effortlessly throat-bobbing as it swallows. You cannot help but marvel at the precision. Joke number 1. If you tried the same move, you would probably poke yourself in the eye before catching dinner. A flock of ducks paddles by their quacks, oddly conversational. They glance at you as though mildly offended you are intruding on their commute. Behind them, dragonflies hover, wings glittering iridescent in the sunlight, flashing turquoise and emerald like tiny living jewels. One lands on the bow of your canoe, resting there calmly as if you are part of the scenery now. You hold your breath, not wanting to disturb it before it zips away again in a blur. Historians still argue how much of the Aztec diet relied on this canal wildlife versus cultivated crops. Some sources claim that ducks, herons, and even water insects were prized additions to meals, while others suggest farming dominated. Either way, the presence of such abundant life suggests the chinampas were more than just farmland. They were ecosystems carefully balanced. Quirky tidbit. It is recorded that Aztec nobles sometimes kept exotic birds, not only for their feathers but also for their songs. Imagine a house filled not with dogs or cats, but with brightly plumed birds, singing all day long. It sounds delightful, though perhaps a little noisy for sleeping in. As you drift, you notice ripples spreading across the water. Then the sleek head of an otter pops up, its whiskers twitching. It stares at you, unbothered, before diving again, leaving only bubbles behind. You grin, realizing that even here among farmers and priests, play belongs not only to children but to animals too. Joke number 2. If you could interview the otter, it would probably tell you it is the real master of the chinampas. Birdsong fills the air, trills, caws, and the occasional squawk. A kingfisher darts low wings, blurring, and splashes into the canal with a triumphant spray rising with its catch. The sight jolts you slightly, but then you settle back, watching the rhythm of life repeat itself over and over. Und Feedglide. Rest. It is the same cycle the farmers follow, mirrored in feather and scale. Historians still debate whether this coexistence was intentional ecological design or a fortunate accident of farming methods. Did the Aztecs plan for fish and birds to thrive alongside their crops, or did the abundance simply flourish in response to human labor? The answer may not matter. You can see with your own eyes that both people and wildlife benefit. You rest your hand on the edge of the canoe fingers, skimming the water. Tiny insects skate across the surface, their legs creating ripples like delicate embroidery. You imagine the canal as a vast fabric woven of movements, paddles, wings, tails, and roots, all stitched together into one seamless pattern. It is oddly calming, like watching the weave of a blanket pulled slowly over your shoulders. The sun angles lower, now light turning, warmer, softer. It catches the feathers of a passing heron, making them glow as though painted in molten gold. The heron takes off wings wide, lifting into the air with a slow, powerful rhythm. For a moment you envy its effortless grace. Joke number 3. You consider flapping your arms to join it, but given your canoe balancing skills, you would end up in the mud faster than you could say, Chinampa. The canal narrows again, framed tightly by reeds. Birds still call from hidden perches, their voices echoing like flutes through a leafy hall. You close your eyes briefly, letting the sounds wash over you, the chorus of nature blending with the faint lap of water against the canoe. It is not silence, but a kind of gentle fullness that makes silence unnecessary. When you open your eyes, the reeds part, and you glimpse the next bend of the canal. Voices drift faintly low, and conversational, carrying the cadence of gossip across the water. You realize you are approaching neighbors, trading news, laughter, and perhaps a few rumors. The wildlife fades into the background as the human world returns, drawing you onward. The reeds thin, and the quiet chatter of birds gives way to something more familiar, the hum of voices carried clear across the water. As you drift closer, you spot 2 canoes pulled alongside one another, the paddles set aside, their owners leaning in with animated faces. It is gossip on the water, as timeless as any office, coffee break, or neighborhood fence conversation. One man gestures broadly, a basket of squash forgotten at his feet. He leans forward, lowering his voice conspiratorially, though it carries easily across the still surface. He is talking about maize prices. Apparently the market is shifting again, and some farmers are charging more than others. His companion laughs, shaking his head, muttering something about those greedy fellows upstream. Joke number 1. You realize that even 500 years ago, people were basically complaining about inflation. The conversation meanders as gossip always does. They talk about a local family whose son has been skipping his work on the Chinampas, preferring to play music instead. One shrugs as if to say, well, at least he is good at it, while the other predicts doom, gloom, and lazy generations ahead. You stifle a smile, thinking about every grandparent in history worrying that the youth these days are not serious enough. Historians still argue how much daily Aztec gossip filtered into the grand political stage. Some scholars suggest that rumors and local chatter shaped larger decisions, fueling unrest or calming tempers, while others believe it remained nothing more than idle talk. Still, it is tempting to imagine that an empire as vast as this one was held together not just by armies and tribute, but by conversations whispered from one canoe to another. As you drift by, you catch the sharper edge of the dialogue, someone muttering about tribute, demands about how much maize must be sent to Tenochtitlan this season. The man rolls his eyes, and though he does not dare speak too loudly, the frustration is plain. His neighbor nods in sympathy, but quickly changes the subject, pointing to a woman paddling past with baskets of flowers. He comments not on the blossoms, but on her skill steering the canoe. You raise your eyebrows at the sudden pivot, amused at how seamlessly complaint transforms into flattery. Joke number 2. You think to yourself that this is the Aztec version of switching tabs when the teacher walks by. The gossip is not limited to men. On another chinampa, two women tend herbs while whispering to each other. Their voices drift faintly, but you catch fragments about a neighbor's new cloak dyed in colors, suspiciously fine for someone of modest status. One woman suggests maybe he has friends in high places. The other rolls her eyes, certain it is borrowed or stolen. The herbs continue to be plucked, bundled, and tied, but their tongues work as steadily as their hands. Quirky tidbit. Some codices mention songs and poems spreading across neighborhoods like wildfire, what we might now call memes of their day. Imagine a catchy verse about someone's clumsy paddling or scandalous romance echoing from chinampa to chinampa until the whole community hums it under their breath. You picture an Aztec bard rolling his eyes, muttering, "I wrote serious epic poetry, and everyone just wants the gossip jingle." The voices around you rise and fall with ease, never rushed, never hushed for long. Gossip here is not malicious so much as connective tissue stitching the community together with stories, complaints, and shared laughter. Historians still debate whether such conversations carried coded messages of resistance or were merely harmless chatter. Either way, you see how essential it is, the kind of dialogue that turns a vast empire into a human neighborhood. One canoe pushes past you, its owner waving cheerfully. He calls out a joke about the size of your boat compared to your apparent lack of goods, implying you must be a lazy farmer. The others laugh, and you realize you have just been folded into the gossip circuit yourself. Joke number 3. Congratulations, you are now the subject of the tourist farmer who grows nothing but naps rumor. You lean back, letting the laughter drift behind you as the canoe carries you onward. The sound fades, but the warmth remains as though you were briefly woven into the fabric of their community. Ahead you spot artisans, hunched over their crafts, on the banks of the Chinampa's hands, busy shaping clay, weaving reeds, and sharpening obsidian blades. The shift from gossip to labor feels seamless, as though every moment here flows naturally into the next. The voices of gossip melt into the background as you drift forward, and now the scene changes once again. Along the edge of the chinampas, you see artisans crouched in the shade of willows, their hands moving with steady rhythm. This is where craftwork meets trade, where the empire's ingenuity stretches beyond crops and fish, into tools, mats, and pottery that weave daily life together. One man kneels on a reed mat, weaving another mat from fresh stalks. His fingers move so quickly they blur, pushing and pulling, creating a tight pattern that will hold strong for years. The reeds whisper as he works, a soft, rustling sound, almost like the hush of a lullaby. You lean closer and notice the intricate designs, geometric patterns so clean they could hang in a modern art gallery. Joke number 1. You wonder if IKEA's first draft of furniture instructions was just a picture of this guy, weaving mats with the caption, "Figure it out." Nearby, a woman shapes clay on a small wheel, her hands slick with mud. She forms a bowl, spinning it carefully, smoothing the edges with a shard of obsidian. The vessel takes shape under her touch, round, balanced, practical yet beautiful. She sets it aside to dry in the sun, then starts again, her movements calm and unhurried. You imagine rows of these bowls lined up in markets, each one carrying beans, maize, or sauces flavored with chili. Quirky tidbit. Archaeologists have found chinampa sites littered with broken pottery shards, not always discarded but sometimes used deliberately to reinforce soil. Here, though, the pottery is fresh and whole, destined for kitchens or trade. The fragments beneath your feet are simply the forgotten ancestors of bowls and jars that once held the same beans you tasted earlier. Historians still argue how much of this artisan labor was independent, household production versus organized tribute for the empire. Were these mats and bowls made for personal use, or were they part of the vast flow of goods that sustained Tenochtitlan's markets? The debate lingers, but in front of you, the work is both intimate and practical. a family ensuring their own survival while adding beauty to the everyday. On another chinampa, a young boy hammers carefully at a block of obsidian, shaping it into a blade. Each strike chips off a flake, sharp as glass. He handles it gingerly, proud of the shard's edge, while his father inspects the work. These blades will cut maize, stalks, skin, fish, and serve in trade for goods like salt or cotton. The boy's face lights up when his father nods approval. Joke number 2. You picture the boy bragging to his friends. My dad says my obsidian knife could slice through tortillas like butter. You notice a barter taking place nearby. A fisherman unloads a basket of fresh carp, offering it to the potter in exchange for 2 new jars. No coins, no bills, just an exchange of what each has for what each needs. The 2 laugh as they finalize the deal, one walking away with vessels, the other with dinner. You realize this is the heartbeat of trade, simple, direct, human. Further along, women sit in a circle weaving cotton threads dyed in rich colors. Indigo blues, cochineal reds, and soft yellows twist together into textiles that shimmer in the light. They chat while they work, their voices flowing as steadily as their hands. You run your fingers along one finished cloth and feel its softness fine enough to impress even modern fabric snobs. Historians still debate whether the dyes used here were strictly local or imported through vast trade networks reaching as far as Central America. The empire's reach was enormous, and chinampas were only one node in a web of exchange. Yet, watching these women weave, you realize that global networks begin with the movement of individual hands. The air is alive with the smell of clay dust, damp reeds, and faint smoke from fires used to harden tools. A dog trots by sniffing curiously at the bundles of reeds before curling up in the sun with a sigh. Children linger at the edges, playing with clay scraps, shaping them into crude figures of birds or fish. Their laughter adds a lightness to the work, reminding you that every generation learns by copying, fumbling, and creating their own playthings. Joke number 3. You imagine a child proudly presenting a lopsided clay duck to their parent, only for the parent to nod solemnly and say, "Yes, dear, that will definitely hold soup." The artisans pause, occasionally wiping sweat from their foreheads, sipping from gourds of water, exchanging goods with passing canoes. The flow of labor never fully stops, but it never feels rushed either. It is steady, purposeful, like the paddle strokes that carry you through the canal. You drift past the sound of reed weaving fading, the sight of clay vessels drying in neat rows behind you. The air grows heavier, the conversation sharper. You notice figures further down, speaking in low tones, glancing toward the water with unease. The day is not only work and laughter. There are whispers here too, hints of tension in this watery paradise. The air thickens as you glide into a stretch where voices carry differently short-clipped, a little too careful. 2 farmers stand on a narrow bank with their paddles planted like spears, staring at a corner where the edge has slumped into the canal. The willow that once pinned that corner is gone. The cut so neat it looks like a bite taken by a very tidy beaver. No one laughs. Here, maintenance is not an occasional task. It is the pulse of life. The chinampa phrase, people stitch it back again and again because water is generous and also hungry. You nudge closer. The men are already counting the repair in their heads. How many baskets of mud? How much reed to weave? How long it will take before the sun tips low? A woman poles over from the next plot, clucks her tongue and runs her fingers along the torn fringe as if feeling a ripped sleeve. "Someone cut it at night," she says. Not loudly, but the words sink like a stone. In this watery city, theft is often a bend, not a blow. Divert a trickle here, shave a spadeful there, and your neighbour's harvest leans toward your gate. Joke number 1. Somewhere, a very unfunny bandit thinks of this as hydraulic borrowing. Everyone else calls it what it is. Historians still argue whether canal theft was common enough to require formal patrols or whether it flared only in lean seasons when water ran low. Some sources hint at fines and watchmen. Others suggest grudges settled with conspicuous shovel marks and equally conspicuous silence. Whatever the policy, the physics are simple. Water is wealth, and currents can be persuaded. The repair begins with the speed of habit. Reeds are woven into a quick fence, then basket after basket of lake mud is slapped into the weave until the edge grows thicker and darker, a wet seam sewn straight. A young willow is planted and tied with braided reed to take root and hold. Quirky tidbit. Some families thread squash vines into fresh repairs, a living stitch whose big leaves shade the mud, while the roots knit the corner tight. You can almost hear the chinampa say thank you. Beyond the mending, the canal narrows between poles, lashed into a gate. You slide through and meet news travelling as fast as water. A trader with salt cakes wrapped in leaves mutters that scouts from rival city-states have been seen near the causeways. Names move like wind. Tlaxcala, Huexotzinco. Neighbours who sell obsidian in calm years and measure distance in spear lengths in bad ones. The lake does not care who quarrels with whom, but people do, and rumour rides every paddle stroke. A fisherman ties his canoe to a willow and studies the sky. Here storms build in an afternoon. One hard rain can tear banks loose, sink a harvest, and shuffle careful canals into a brown, impatient braid. He squints at the cloud line, shakes his head and says, "Not today. Half to you, half to Tlaloc." Historians still argue whether the great dikes and causeways were as dependable as later accounts claim, or whether memory sanded down the panic between floods. We do know there were feats of engineering, a massive dike raised to hold brackish water at bay, causeways that stitched city to shore, proof that empire here meant carpenters and dredgers as much as warriors. You pass a plot where the willows are still thin, tied upright like shy teenagers. A girl tamps mud with a flat board, each thump sending rings across the canal like sleepy drums. She tells you their bank has slipped twice this season and there is no sense waiting for help that might not come. You nod, learning the local gospel. In a world made of edges, patience is a tool. Joke number 2. If there were a lakeside advice column, every answer would be plant a willow, dredge some mud, and talk to your neighbours. Whispers ripple along the water about smaller trespasses. Someone upriver desperate skimmed night soil from another family's compost heap, promising to return it with interest which no one wants defined. No officials are told. Everyone simply watches their piles more closely. The line between sharing and stealing here is as narrow as a paddle blade. On a wider bank, two cousins argue over tribute. The quota has shifted: more maize, fewer fish, because someone in the city has recounted mouths or miscounted them. Historians still argue whether such adjustments were careful responses to shortages or blunt demands that landed wherever they landed. The cousins do not debate policy. They pass hours whose hands will dredge, whose baskets will carry, whose sleep will be traded for extra rows of beans. You ease past a rack where nets hang to dry, mended with coarse thread. Last season's flood line stains the willow trunks 2 handspans up a brown brushstroke that records the day the water climbed. People here measure time in repairs. The year ice came late the morning. A canoe of marigolds vanished under a gust. The afternoon, 3 boats flipped, and everyone laughed. Only after counting heads. The chinampa remembers in silt root and the stubborn lean of new stakes. Quirky tidbit. Some households hang little reed chimes or hollow gourds at vulnerable corners. At night, a thief's touch turns wind into percussion, and somewhere a light sleeper or a dog with career ambitions wakes. You imagine a burglar freezing while a gourd rattles like a guilty conscience. Farther along, a man sits on a rock scraping barnacles from a mooring post with an obsidian blade. Not drama maintenance. He nods toward the markets and asks whether chilies are short downstream. You shrug, which is to say you do not know. He shrugs back, which is to say he will plant more anyway. Plans here come in layers. What you intend, what the water intends, and what the empire intends. And on good days, two of the three agree. A priest's canoe slips by the same white cotton you saw at midday stretched smooth over his shoulders. He does not stop to chant. He simply lifts a hand in greeting and studies the patched bank, the way you might study a healing scar. Rituals bless, but repairs endure. Somewhere behind you, a child tries a clay whistle and produces a heroic squeak that startles a duck into flight. The circle of the afternoon closes work watchfulness, a small laugh, then work again. Joke number 3. You briefly consider volunteering for a neighborhood watch, then remember, your resume currently reads tourist farmer who grows nothing but naps per the gossip circuit. You decide to contribute by staying upright in the canoe. The light softens, and the tightness in people's shoulders slips a notch. Repairs hold. Paddles resume their quiet metronome. A boy pretends not to notice the fresh footprint where a bank used to be. A woman knots a new tie around a young willow and hums the tune you heard at midday incense as if a blessing stitched into a knot will hold better than cord alone. Yet the watchfulness does not drain away. In this water-woven city, every garden is also a shoreline, every neighbor both lifeline and risk, and every afternoon a ledger of what the lake gave and what it took back. You breathe out and feel how the place teaches its lesson without speeches. To live here is to be part farmer, part engineer, part diplomat, calm hands on a shifting map. The canoe slides forward, hardly a ripple over stitches that will need stitching again tomorrow and the next day and the next, because the chinampas endure only as long as the people who keep mending them. The tension of repairs and whispered rumors slips away as the canal carries you toward the sound of music. At first it is faint, just a thread of melody winding through reeds, but then it grows, woven with the beat of drums and the high trill of flutes. Evening is approaching, and the chinampas seem to lean toward rest. The sun droops low, its light spilling gold across the water, turning every ripple into a brushstroke. You round a bend and see them. A small group gathered at the end of a chinampa, their canoes tied up neatly, baskets set aside. A boy taps a drum stretched with deerskin, his hands soft but steady as though he has been practicing all day. A girl blows into a flute carved from bone, her cheeks puffing her tune simple but sweet. Around them, older voices rise in song, the kind that feels less like performance and more like an old habit, a way to ease the day's weight. The lyrics drifting in Nahuatl are impossible for you to fully follow, but their cadence feels familiar. You catch the word maize repeated softly and imagine it is thanks for another day's work, another harvest inching closer. Historians still argue whether these evening gatherings were organized rituals or just casual neighborly music. Some claim flutes and drums were reserved for ceremonies, while others insist they were common in daily life, just as likely to accompany gossip as sacrifice. Watching this, you lean toward the second view because the rhythm here feels too relaxed to be official, too human to be anything but joy. Quirky tidbit. Some flutes from this era had 2 pipes, allowing musicians to play dual tones at once. Imagine standing in the reeds and hearing a flute sing in harmony with itself like a duet performed by one breath. Tonight, though, the simple single notes float across the water enough to make dragonflies hover and ducks bob their heads as if approving. The sound relaxes you. Each drum beat is like a heartbeat, slow and steady, each flute note like a breeze tugging at your shoulders. You close your eyes and let it wash over you the way you might let waves carry you in shallow surf. Joke number 1. You consider downloading the performance to your playlist, lo-fi Aztec beats to chill and irrigate to. Families gather nearby, sitting on mats or perching on canoe edges, their voices blending into the song. A man hums softly while mending a net, his hands never stopping, even as his voice joins the tune. A woman plucks petals from marigolds, dropping them one by one into the canal, the orange flecks glowing against the deepening water, the children from earlier wet-haired and still buzzing from play. Quiet down now, their eyes heavy but their smiles bright as they lean into parents' laps. The music grows louder, steadier. The flute wavers, the drum thumps with more confidence, and then someone begins to clap slow and deliberate. The rhythm echoes across the water, answered by another clap further down and then another. Soon the canal feels alive with sound, hands, voices, instruments weaving into a single pulse. It is not polished, not orchestrated, but it is powerful. You feel your chest vibrating with it as though your own heart has been recruited into the band. Historians still puzzle over the role of music in Aztec farming communities. Was it meant to honor the gods, to strengthen bonds, or simply to soothe weary bodies? The debate continues, but here now you know it is all three. The song is gratitude, companionship, and rest braided together in notes. The sun edges lower, kissing the horizon. Shadows grow long, willows stretching like dark fingers across the water. The gold fades to amber, then deepens into the first hint of purple. The song slows, tapering into soft humming. One final beat of the drum rings out low and resonant like the earth itself sighing. Then silence. Only the rustle of reeds and the lap of water remain. Joke number 2. You think about how modern concerts end with a standing ovation. Here the applause is just ducks flapping noisily and a few tired yawns from children. Honestly, it feels more fitting. The families linger, talking softly, finishing the last bites of food, pulling cloaks tighter as the evening chill begins. The musicians put away their instruments carefully, the flute wrapped in cloth, the drum tucked under an arm. A woman lights a small torch, setting it upright in the mud, its glow flickering against the gathering dark. Quirky detail. Some Aztec gatherings ended with a simple ritual of scattering flowers onto the water, believing that beauty should not be hoarded but shared with the lake. You watch as a handful of petals drifts past your canoe, glowing like embers in the torchlight. Joke number 3. You imagine explaining to someone that the highlight of your night was watching marigold petals float away and realizing that sounds less like boredom and more like wisdom. The last voices fade as canoes push off, heading homeward. The music lingers only in memory, but the calm it left behind is stronger than silence. You feel it in your shoulders, your breath, your slowing pulse. The sun has nearly disappeared now, leaving only streaks of orange on the horizon. Ahead, the Chinampas settle into darkness, fires flickering faintly in the distance. You drift forward, ready to enter the night among the gardens. The sky deepens into indigo as you slip farther along the canal. The warmth of the day has drained away, leaving the air cool, almost damp, with the smell of water and earth, more pronounced now that the sun has gone. The Chinampas settle into quiet. Where there was laughter and music an hour ago now, there is only the occasional crackle of a fire and the murmur of voices lowered for evening. A canoe glides past its bow, lit by a small clay lamp. The flame flickers wildly with every ripple, casting light that dances across the water's surface like restless fireflies. The man at the stern nods to you, his face half in shadow, then vanishes around a bend. Another canoe drifts behind him, carrying bundles of reeds tied in tight rolls, heading towards some late-night repair. Even as darkness settles, the work never stops entirely. You pause your paddle and let the canoe drift. The stillness presses gently against your ears. Above, stars prick through the fading twilight. They reflect in the canal so perfectly that you feel suspended between two skies, one above, one below. It is a strange, calming sensation, as though you are floating not on water, but on the edge of the universe itself. Joke number 1. You half expect a passing fisherman to offer directions to Orion's belt, along with the price of carp. Fires burn on the Chinampas' small and scattered their smoke, curling upward in thin ribbons. Families huddle around them, eating the last of the day's food, talking in low tones. A child's laughter breaks through once, then fades into a yawn as he leans into his mother's lap. The scene feels timeless, a rhythm that repeats night after night, season after season. Historians still argue whether nights on the Chinampas were seen as restful or risky. Some accounts describe watchmen keeping eyes peeled for thieves, while others suggest evenings were for winding down in peace. Perhaps it depended on the mood of the water, the season, or the trust between neighbours. You let your eyes follow the flickering torches. The reflections stretch long across the water, swaying with each breeze. Quirky tidbit. Some Aztec households tied floating lamps to canoes or reeds, letting them drift on the canals like little stars set loose. They were thought to guide ancestors or simply to bring beauty to the night. You imagine the quiet delight of seeing a constellation not just above you but glowing gently at eye level. Somewhere nearby a drum beats softly, not the lively rhythm of evening songs but a low, steady thump. Perhaps a heartbeat for the night. It does not last long, fading into silence, but its echo lingers in your chest. You find yourself breathing slower, your thoughts loosening like knots untying themselves. Joke number 2. You think if your modern therapist could see you now, they would cancel every appointment and just prescribe one canoe ride through Xochimilco nightly. The wildlife shifts with the darkness. Frogs croak from the reeds, their voices overlapping into a chorus. Bats flicker through the air, catching insects above the water. Somewhere far off an owl hoots its call deep and soothing. The canals belong as much to these creatures as to the farmers, and in the dark they seem to reclaim their share. Your canoe brushes gently against a willow branch, its leaves trailing like cool fingers along your arm. You look up and see its silhouette tall and calm against the sky. You remember the willow's role from earlier, binding the Chinampas together, holding the soil firm, offering shade. Now in the quiet of night, it seems to serve as a watchman too, silent, steady-rooted. Historians still puzzle over how safe the Chinampas were once the sun went down. Some sources warn of raiders slipping through the dark, stealing crops or cutting banks. Others suggest the community ties were strong enough that nights passed peacefully. Drifting here, you sense both possibilities. Shadows can comfort, and shadows can conceal. Tonight, though, the air is too calm, the fires too steady, the stars too clear for fear to take root. You lean back the canoe, rocking lightly beneath you, and let your gaze drift upward. The Milky Way sprawls across the sky, a faint white haze stretching from horizon to horizon. The same stars that guided navigators across oceans shine here, reflected in the canal at your fingertips. Joke number 3. You realize you are technically double stargazing above and below, and yet you still could not point out more than 3 constellations. The night deepens further. Voices grow, fewer fires dim. Only the faint lap of water against wood and the steady chorus of frogs remain. You feel the heaviness of sleep tugging at your shoulders, the rhythm of the canal syncing with your own breathing. The Chinampas, once bustling and noisy, have folded themselves into quiet rest. You let your canoe drift without paddling, trusting the water to carry you gently like a cradle rocked by unseen hands. The last flames wink along the banks, then fade, leaving only stars above and below. The empire may rise and fall, but in this moment, on this night, it is simply a garden afloat, breathing softly under the sky. The water holds you steady and sure, like a slow breath stretched into eternity. The sounds that filled the afternoon, laughter, gossip, flutes and frogs, have quieted into a faint background hum. It is not silence, but a kind of gentle fullness where every sound is softened as if wrapped in cloth. The canoe rocks almost imperceptibly the way a cradle does the rhythm, reminding you that you are safe, carried, unhurried. You watch the stars shimmer in the canal and they blur a little as your eyes grow heavy. The branches overhead sway, and their reflections sway too, as though the world itself has doubled in kindness. A single torch flickers faintly on a distant bank, its glow no more than a heartbeat in the dark. Beyond that, there is only the sky wide and endless watching over you. Your breathing slows. Each inhale tastes faintly of earth and water. Each exhale drifts out to join the reeds. The chinampas are at rest, and so are you. The day's work has been done. The harvest will wait for morning. For now, there is only this: the water beneath you, the stars above you, the steady, soothing weight of night pressing gently around you. Let your thoughts scatter like petals on the surface of the canal. Let them drift until they sink and vanish. Nothing more is required of you now. You are part of the rhythm, part of the stillness, part of a night that has held countless lives before you and will hold countless more. Sleep as softly as the water moves. Sleep as steadily as the willows stand. Sleep while the stars keep watch. End of script. Sweet dreams,